The rain was coming down hard that Tuesday evening, making the streets look like black mirrors under the streetlights. 17-year-old David Johnson pulled his hoodie tighter as he walked home from his shift at Peterson's grocery store. His sneakers splashed through puddles, and he was already thinking about the math homework waiting for him at home. David had been working at the store for 8 months now, stacking shelves and helping customers after school. The pay wasn't much, but every dollar helped his mom with the bills. She worked 2 jobs already, and David knew better than to ask for spending money when there were more important things to worry about. As he turned the corner near the highway overpass, David was lost in thought about his upcoming history test. That's when he heard it, the awful screech of tires trying to grip wet asphalt. The sound made his stomach drop. He'd heard that sound before, and it never meant anything good. Then came the crash, metal hitting concrete with a force that seemed to shake the ground. David's head snapped up, and he saw something that made his blood run cold. A big black car had skidded off the road and slammed straight into the concrete barrier. The front end was completely smashed, and steam was already starting to rise from under the hood. For a split second, David just stood there, his mind trying to process what he was seeing. Cars passed by on the main road, their headlights cutting through the rain, but nobody else seemed to have noticed the accident yet. The crashed car was partially hidden behind some bushes, off the main road where it was harder to see. David didn't think. He just moved. Dropping his backpack right there on the sidewalk, he ran toward the wreck. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it over the sound of the rain. As he got closer, he could see that the driver's side door was dented pretty bad, but it looked like it might still open. "Hello," David called out as he approached the car. "Are you okay in there?" No answer. David reached the driver's side window and peered in. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. An older man, probably in his 60s, was slumped over the steering wheel. Blood was trickling down from a cut on his forehead, and his eyes were closed. The man was wearing an expensive-looking suit, and even in the dim light, David could see a fancy watch on his wrist. But none of that mattered right now. What mattered was that this man needed help, and David might be the only person who could give it to him. David tried the door handle. It was stuck at first, but when he put his shoulder into it and pulled hard, it opened with a groan of bent metal. The smell hit him immediately, a mix of gasoline, burnt rubber, and something else that made him worry the car might be in real danger of catching fire. "Sir? Sir, can you hear me?" David said, gently shaking the man's shoulder. The man's eyes fluttered open for a moment, unfocused and confused. He tried to say something, but the words came out slurred and unclear. David pulled out his phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. While it rang, he kept talking to the injured man, trying to keep him conscious. 911, what's your emergency? There's been a car accident, David said, surprised at how steady his own voice sounded. A man is hurt pretty bad. We're on Riverside Drive, right near the overpass by the old gas station. Is the victim conscious? David looked at the man, whose eyes had closed again. Sort of. He keeps going in and out. Okay, paramedics are on their way. Stay on the line with me. Is the vehicle smoking or do you smell gas? David's stomach dropped. Yeah, both. There's smoke coming from under the hood and I can definitely smell gas. You need to get him out of there if you can do it safely. Can you tell if he has any major injuries to his neck or back? David's hands were shaking now. He'd seen enough medical shows to know that moving someone with a spinal injury could make things worse. But if the car caught fire, I don't know, David said. But the car might explode, right? Just be very careful. Support his head and neck if you can. David took a deep breath. This was way more responsibility than he'd ever had in his life, but there was no choice. Taking off his work shirt, leaving him in just a t-shirt in the cold rain, David gently placed one hand behind the man's head and neck. With his other arm, he carefully helped lift the man out of the driver's seat. Key. Man was heavier than David expected, and for a moment he thought he might not be able to do it, but somehow he managed to get him out of the car and a safe distance away. David laid the man down on the wet grass and used his work shirt to apply pressure to the cut on his forehead, just like he'd seen in movies. Sir, stay with me, David said, kneeling beside him in the rain. Help is coming. You're going to be okay. The man's eyes opened again, and this time they seemed a little more focused. He looked up at David with confusion, like he was trying to figure out where he was and what had happened. "The car," the man whispered. "Don't worry about the car," David said. "You're safe now. That's all that matters." In the distance, David could hear sirens getting louder. Relief washed over him. Real help was coming. People who actually knew what they were doing. The paramedics arrived first, followed quickly by a fire truck and 2 police cars. Suddenly, the quiet accident scene was full of flashing lights and trained professionals taking over. David stepped back to give them room to work, but he stayed close in case they needed to ask him anything. One of the paramedics, a woman with kind eyes, came over to him while her partner worked on the injured man. "You did good, kid," she said. "How did you know to get him out of the car?" "The 911 operator told me to because of the gas smell," David said. "Is he going to be okay?" She looked back at her partner, who was already getting the man ready to transport to the hospital. "Looks like a concussion and some cuts, but you probably saved his life. That engine block was getting pretty hot. Could have been a lot worse if you hadn't gotten him out when you did." David felt his knees go weak. He'd actually saved someone's life. He couldn't believe it. A police officer came over to take David's statement, asking him to explain exactly what he'd seen and done. David told the whole story, from hearing the crash to pulling the man from the car. The officer wrote everything down and thanked him for his quick thinking. As the ambulance pulled away with the injured man inside, David suddenly remembered his backpack. He found it where he'd dropped it on the sidewalk, soaked from the rain but with his homework still dry inside the plastic folder. Walking home, David's mind was racing. He kept thinking about the man's face, the fear and confusion in his eyes. He wondered if the man had a family, if someone was waiting for him to come home. He hoped the man would be okay, that he'd recover fully from his injuries. When David finally got home, his mother took one look at his wet clothes and concerned expression and knew something had happened. As he told her about the accident, her eyes filled with tears of pride and worry. "You could have been hurt," she said, hugging him tight. "But I couldn't just leave him there, Mom," David replied. "What if that was you in that car? Wouldn't you want someone to help?" His mother held him even tighter. She'd raised her son to do the right thing, even when it was hard. Tonight, he'd proven that those lessons had taken root. David couldn't stop thinking about the man from the accident. Even though the paramedics had told him he'd done everything right, he kept wondering if the man was okay. Was he awake? Did he remember what happened? David had seen enough movies to know that head injuries could be serious, and the guilt of not knowing was eating at him. 3 days passed, and David found himself distracted at school and work. During his lunch break at Peterson's grocery store, he made a decision that surprised even himself. He was going to find out which hospital they'd taken the man to and check on him. It took some courage to call around to the local hospitals, but finally, a receptionist at City General confirmed that yes, they had a patient from a car accident on Tuesday night. She couldn't give David any details over the phone, but she did say that visiting hours were until 8 in the evening. David's shift ended at 6, which gave him just enough time to catch the bus to the hospital. He felt nervous the whole ride there. What if the man didn't want to see him? What if his family thought David was some kind of weirdo for showing up? But something inside him said he needed to do this. He needed to know that the man was going to be all right. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and floor wax, and the bright fluorescent lights made everything look too white and clean. David approached the information desk, where a friendly older woman with gray hair smiled at him. "I'm looking for the man who was in a car accident on Tuesday night," David said, feeling awkward. I'm the one who helped him." The woman's face lit up with recognition. "Oh my goodness, you're the young man who saved Mr. Sterling. Room 314. He's been asking about you." David's heart jumped. The man had been asking about him? He took the elevator to the 3rd floor, his palms sweating as the numbers climbed. Room 314 was halfway down a long hallway lined with identical doors. David knocked softly and heard a voice call out, "Come in." When he pushed open the door, he saw the man from the accident sitting up in bed, looking much better than he had 3 nights ago. There was a bandage on his forehead where the cut had been, and his left arm was in a sling, but his eyes were clear and alert. When he saw David, his face broke into the biggest smile. "There he is," the man said, his voice strong and warm. "My guardian angel. Please come in, sit down." David felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay, sir. I've been worried about you." "Worried about me?" The man laughed, but not in a mean way. "Son, you saved my life. If anything, I should be worried about you. Did you catch a cold from standing in that rain? Are you hurt at all?" "No, sir, I'm fine," David said, taking a seat in the chair next to the bed. "The doctor said you're going to be okay?" "Thanks to you, yes. Concussion, some bruised ribs and a dislocated shoulder, but I'll live to see another day." The man extended his right hand. "I'm Robert Sterling, by the way, and I owe you everything." David shook his hand, still feeling surreal about the whole situation. "I'm David Johnson, sir, and you don't owe me anything. Anyone would have done the same thing." Robert Sterling shook his head firmly. "No, David, they wouldn't have. I've been lying here for 3 days thinking about this. Do you know how many cars passed by that night? The police told me at least a dozen vehicles went by before the first responders arrived, but only one person stopped to help. Only one person risked their own safety to pull a complete stranger out of a burning car." "The car was burning?" David asked, his eyes wide. "Well, not exactly burning, but the engine was overheating badly. The fire chief said it could have caught fire within minutes. You got me out just in time." Robert's voice got quieter, more serious. "David, I need you to understand something. You didn't just help someone that night. You saved a life. You saved my life." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both thinking about how close things had come to being much worse. "Tell me about yourself, David," Robert said eventually. "I want to know about the person who gave me a second chance." David felt uncomfortable talking about himself, but something about Robert Sterling made him feel at ease. Maybe it was the way the older man listened so carefully, or how his eyes showed genuine interest in every word David said. "There's not much to tell, really," David started. "I'm 17, a senior at Lincoln High School. I work part-time at Peterson's Grocery to help my mom with bills. She works 2 jobs and things are pretty tight at home." "What about your father?" Robert asked gently. "He left when I was 10, David said, surprised at how easily the words came out. He usually didn't talk about this with anyone. Mom says he couldn't handle the responsibility, but we're doing okay, just the 2 of us." Robert nodded thoughtfully. "Your mother raised a remarkable young man. What are your plans after high school?" David's face fell a little. "I want to go to college, but..." He shrugged. "Money's tight, you know. I've got decent grades, but not good enough for a full scholarship, and we can't afford the student loans. What would you study if money wasn't an issue? Engineering, maybe? Or business? I like solving problems and figuring out how things work." David's eyes lit up when he talked about his dreams. "I've always thought it would be cool to design things that could help people, you know? Make life better somehow." Robert was quiet for a long moment, and David worried he'd said too much. But when he looked at the older man's face, he saw something unexpected. Robert's eyes were watery, and he was staring out the window with a distant expression. "Mr. Sterling, are you okay?" Robert wiped his eyes and looked back at David. "I'm sorry. You just remind me so much of my son. He would have been about your age now." "Would have been?" David asked softly. "He died in a car accident when he was 15, Robert said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Drunk driver ran a red light. That was 8 years ago, but sometimes it feels like yesterday." David felt his heart break for this man. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Sterling." "Thank you." His name was Michael, and he wanted to be an engineer too, always building things, taking apart electronics to see how they worked. He would have loved meeting you. Robert smiled sadly. "You know, I've spent the last 8 years wondering why my son had to die while I got to live. But lying here these past few days thinking about what you did for me, I think I'm starting to understand." David didn't know what to say to that, so he just listened. "Michael always said he wanted to make a difference in the world," Robert continued. Maybe he can't do that himself anymore, but maybe I can do it for him. They talked for another hour about everything and nothing. Robert told David about his business, Sterling Industries, which made construction equipment and employed over 3,000 people. David told Robert about his mother, how she worked as a nurse's aide during the day and cleaned offices at night, but still always made time to help him with homework. When visiting hours ended, Robert walked David to the elevator, moving slowly but steadily. "David," he said as the elevator doors opened, "I want you to promise me something. Promise me you'll keep in touch. I meant what I said earlier. You gave me a second chance at life. I'd like to be part of yours if you'll let me." David nodded, not trusting his voice to work properly. "And David, that conversation we had about college, that's not over. Not by a long shot." As the elevator doors closed, David saw Robert Sterling smiling at him. And for the first time in years, David felt like maybe, just maybe, his dreams weren't as impossible as they seemed. 2 weeks had passed since David's visit to the hospital, and life had mostly returned to normal. He went to school, worked his shifts at Peterson's grocery, and helped his mom around the house. But he couldn't stop thinking about Robert Sterling and their conversation. The older man had seemed so genuine when he said he wanted to stay in touch, but David figured that was just something people said when they were feeling grateful. Rich people probably forgot about regular folks like him pretty quickly. That's why David was so surprised when his phone rang during lunch break at school, and he saw an unknown number on the screen. "Hello?" David answered, stepping away from his friends at their usual table. "David? This is Robert Sterling." David's heart skipped a beat. "Mr. Sterling, how are you feeling?" "Much better, thanks to you. I got out of the hospital yesterday, and I've been thinking about our conversation ever since. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" David looked around the crowded cafeteria. "Sure, but it's pretty loud here. I'm at school." "Perfect. Actually, that's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about. David, I have a proposal for you, and I want you to hear me out completely before you say anything, okay?" David felt nervous butterflies in his stomach. "Okay, sir. I've been doing a lot of thinking these past 2 weeks. About life. About second chances, about what really matters. And I keep coming back to what you told me about wanting to go to college but not being able to afford it." David's mouth went dry. Where was this going? "David, I want to pay for your college education. All of it. Tuition, room and board, books, everything. Any school that accepts you." The words hit David like a physical blow. He actually had to sit down on a nearby bench because his legs suddenly felt weak. "Mr. Sterling, I can't. That's too much." "Please let me finish," Robert said gently. "I know this sounds crazy. I know we barely know each other. But David, you saved my life. Not just physically, but in ways you can't even understand. When I was lying in that hospital bed, I realized I'd been going through the motions for 8 years, ever since Michael died. Just existing, not really living." David could hear the emotion in Robert's voice, and it made his own throat tight. "You reminded me what it feels like to have hope again, to see potential and dreams and all the good things that are possible in this world. Michael can't pursue his dreams anymore, but you can, and I want to help make that happen. But sir, that has to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars." Robert laughed softly. "David, my company made $47 million in profit last year. What you're talking about is less than what I spend on coffee for my employees annually. To you, it's life-changing. To me, it's the best investment I could possibly make." David was quiet for so long that Robert asked if he was still there. "I'm here," David whispered. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. Talk to your mother. Take your time. But David, please don't let pride get in the way of your future. This isn't charity. This is one human being helping another, the same way you helped me." That evening, David could barely concentrate on his homework. When his mother, Patricia, came home from her day job before heading to her night cleaning job, he knew he had to tell her about the phone call. "Mom, can we talk for a minute?" Patricia looked at her son's serious expression and sat down at their small kitchen table. "What's wrong, baby?" David told her everything about Robert's offer. As he spoke, his mother's eyes grew wider, and by the end, she was covering her mouth with both hands. "He wants to do what?" she asked. "Pay for college. All of it." "He says he means it, Mom." Patricia was quiet for a long time, staring at the stack of bills on the counter that she'd been planning to tackle after her night shift. "David, honey, people don't just do things like that. There has to be a catch." "That's what I thought too, but Mom, you should have heard him. He was crying when he talked about his son. I think he really means it." Patricia stood up and paced around their small kitchen. "This is crazy. Things like this don't happen to people like us. But what if they do? What if this is real?" Over the next 3 days, Robert called twice more. Each time he patiently answered David's questions and concerns. He explained that he'd already spoken to his lawyers about setting up an education fund. He'd researched the best engineering programs in the country. He'd even looked into SAT prep courses to help David improve his scores. "I don't want to pressure you," Robert said during their third conversation. "But I do want you to understand that I'm completely serious about this. I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Finally, David agreed to meet with Robert in person to discuss the details. They met at a quiet coffee shop downtown, and David brought his mother with him. Patricia had dressed in her best outfit and was clearly nervous about meeting this wealthy businessman who wanted to change their lives. But Robert immediately put her at ease with his warm smile and genuine interest in her work as a nurse's aide. "Mrs. Johnson, you've raised an extraordinary son," Robert said after they'd ordered their drinks. "I hope you know that." "I do my best," Patricia replied, still somewhat cautious. Robert spread out some papers on the table. "I want to show you both exactly what I'm proposing. This education fund would cover tuition, room and board, books, and living expenses for 4 years at any accredited university. There are no strings attached, no contracts to sign, no obligations afterward." David stared at the numbers on the paper. Even at a state school, the total would be over $100,000. At a private university, it could be twice that. "Why?" Patricia asked bluntly. "Why would you do this for someone you barely know?" Robert's expression grew serious. "Because your son gave me something priceless, Mrs. Johnson. He gave me my life back, not just by pulling me from that car, but by reminding me what goodness looks like, what courage looks like, what the future can look like." He pulled out a photo of a young man who looked remarkably like David might in a few years. "This is my son, Michael. He died when he was 15, and I've been lost ever since. But meeting David, it's like Michael sent him to me, to remind me that life is about helping each other, about making a difference." Patricia's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the photo. "I'm not trying to replace my son," Robert continued. "Nothing could do that. But I can honor his memory by helping another young man achieve the dreams Michael never got to pursue." David reached across the table and touched his mother's hand. "Mom, I think we should say yes." Patricia looked at her son, then at Robert, then back at her son. "Are you sure about this, baby? It's a lot to accept from someone." "I'm sure," David said. "And I promise I won't waste this opportunity. I'll work harder than I've ever worked in my life." Robert smiled. "I never doubted that for a second." 3 weeks later, the local newspaper ran a story about the rescue and Robert's generous offer. The headline read, "Local teen's heroic act leads to life-changing opportunity." David was embarrassed by all the attention, but Robert convinced him that sharing the story might inspire others to help when they see someone in need. As David began applying to colleges that had previously seemed impossible, he often thought about that rainy night and how one moment of doing the right thing had changed everything. He was determined to make Robert Sterling proud and to somehow, someday, pass on the same kind of kindness to someone else who needed it. 3 months had passed since the newspaper story ran, and David's life had completely changed. He'd been accepted to 3 different universities, including the state's top engineering program. His SAT scores had improved dramatically after the prep course Robert had arranged. College applications that once seemed like impossible dreams were now real possibilities sitting on his desk. David was in his room that Saturday morning, comparing financial aid packages and trying to decide between schools, when he heard a firm knock at the front door. It wasn't the casual knock of a neighbor or friend. This was official, authoritative, the kind of knock that made your stomach drop even when you hadn't done anything wrong. He heard his mother's footsteps, then the sound of the door opening. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm Officer Rodriguez, and this is Officer Thompson. We're with the City Police Department. Is David Johnson home?" David's blood turned to ice. Police? What could they possibly want with him? "Yes, he's here," his mother said, and David could hear the worry in her voice. "Is everything all right? Has something happened?" "We'd like to speak with him about a matter we're investigating. May we come in?" David walked out to the living room, on shaky legs. The two officers were middle-aged men in uniform, with serious expressions that made David's heart race. His mother stood beside the door, wrapping her robe tighter around herself. "David Johnson?" Officer Rodriguez asked. "Yes, sir," David replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to ask you some questions about your relationship with Robert Sterling." David felt like the room was spinning. "My relationship with him? I don't understand." Officer Thompson pulled out a small notebook. "We've received reports suggesting there might be some irregularities in how you two met and the financial arrangement that followed." "Irregularities?" David's mother stepped forward. "What kind of irregularities? My son saved that man's life." "Ma'am, we understand that's the story that's been told," Officer Rodriguez said carefully. "But we've received information suggesting that might not be the complete truth." David felt sick. "What do you mean?" "We've gotten an anonymous tip claiming that you might have had prior knowledge of Mr. Sterling's route that night, that perhaps the accident wasn't as random as it appeared." The words hit David like a physical blow. "Are you saying you think I caused the accident?" "We're not saying anything definitive yet," Officer Thompson said, flipping through his notebook. "But we do need to investigate these claims." The tipster suggested that a young man in financial need might have staged a rescue to gain access to a wealthy businessman. David's legs gave out, and he sank onto the couch. His mother immediately sat beside him, putting her arm around his shoulders. "This is insane," Patricia said, her voice shaking with anger. "My son risked his life to help a stranger. How dare you come into our home and suggest he's some kind of criminal?" "Mrs. Johnson, we're just doing our job," Officer Rodriguez said. "These are serious allegations. If someone manipulated a situation to defraud a wealthy individual, that's insurance fraud and extortion." "But I didn't," David said, finding his voice. "I was just walking home from work. I heard the crash and went to help." Officer Thompson leaned forward. "Can you prove you were at work that night?" "Of course, I work at Peterson's Grocery. They have time clocks, security cameras, everything." "What time did your shift end?" David tried to think clearly despite his panic. 6 o'clock, I always work. Until 6 on Tuesdays." "And what time did the accident occur?" I don't know exactly. Maybe 6:30? I was walking home." The officers exchanged a look that made David's stomach churn. "The accident was reported at 6:47 p.m., Officer Rodriguez said. "That's a pretty quick walk from Peterson's Grocery to Riverside Drive." "I walk fast," David said desperately. "I always walk fast when it's raining. You can ask anyone." "David," Officer Thompson said, his voice taking on a harder edge, "the person who called this in claims to have evidence that you knew about Mr. Sterling's regular route home from his office. They say you positioned yourself to intercept him." "That's not true." David stood up, his hands shaking. "I never even heard of Robert Sterling before that night. I didn't know who he was until he told me at the hospital." The tipster also suggests that the extent of Mr. Sterling's injuries might have been exaggerated, Officer Rodriguez continued. "That maybe the whole thing was planned to make him feel extra grateful." David's mother shot to her feet. "Get out of my house right now. This is harassment." "Ma'am, we're conducting a legitimate investigation," Officer Thompson said. "These are serious charges. Insurance fraud can carry a sentence of up to 10 years in prison." 10 years. The words echoed in David's head. 10 years in prison for trying to help someone. We'll need you to come down to the station for formal questioning, Officer Rodriguez said to David, and we'll be interviewing Mr. Sterling as well to get his side of the story. When? David asked weakly. Monday morning, 9 a.m. Don't leave town, and don't discuss this case with anyone, especially not with Mr. Sterling. After the officers left, David and his mother sat in stunned silence. The college acceptance letters on the coffee table suddenly looked like cruel jokes. "Mom, what am I going to do?" David whispered. Patricia pulled her son close. "We're going to fight this, baby. We're going to prove you didn't do anything wrong." But as the weekend passed, things got worse. Word of the investigation somehow leaked, and by Monday morning, half the school was whispering about David being investigated for fraud. Kids who had congratulated him just weeks before now looked at him with suspicion. At work, Mr. Peterson called David into his office. "David, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to suspend you until this matter is resolved," the store manager said, avoiding eye contact. "I can't have employees under criminal investigation working here. It's bad for business." David felt like his whole world was crumbling. The college dreams that had seemed so real just days before now felt impossible. Who would accept a student under investigation for fraud? What university would want someone the police thought was a criminal? That evening, David's phone rang. It was Robert Sterling. "David, I just heard what happened. This is absolutely outrageous. Mr. Sterling, the police said I'm not supposed to talk to you about the case." "Forget what the police said." "David, I know what happened that night. I was there. You saved my life, and now someone is trying to destroy yours for it." David started crying, something he hadn't done since he was a little kid. "Mr. Sterling, what if they're right? What if people think I'm just some kid trying to scam money from rich people?" "David, listen to me very carefully. I don't care what anyone thinks. I know the truth, and I'm going to make sure everyone else knows it too. We're going to fight this together. But what if the college offers get pulled? What if I can't go to school now?" "Those offers aren't going anywhere," Robert said firmly. "I won't let that happen. Whoever is behind this, whatever their motivation, they picked the wrong person to mess with." As David hung up the phone, he felt a tiny spark of hope. But lying in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just taken a turn that might destroy everything he'd worked for. The whispers at school, the suspicious looks from neighbors, the disappointed expression on Mr. Peterson's face. It all felt like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. Tomorrow he would have to sit in a police station and convince detectives that he wasn't a criminal, that he was just a kid who had tried to do the right thing and somehow ended up being treated like a fraud. The American dream that had seemed so close was now slipping through his fingers, and David didn't know if he'd ever get it back. Monday morning came too quickly. David barely slept, tossing and turning all night as he imagined what the police interrogation would be like. His mother made him breakfast, but he couldn't eat more than a few bites. His stomach was twisted in knots, and every time he thought about sitting in that police station, his hands started shaking. At 8:45 a.m., David and his mother walked into the police station. The building felt cold and intimidating, with its gray walls and fluorescent lighting. David had never been inside a police station before, and everything about it made him feel like he was already guilty of something. Officer Rodriguez met them at the front desk and led them to a small interview room with just a table and a few chairs. David sat down across from the two officers with his mother beside him for support. "Before we start," Officer Thompson said, "I want to remind you that anything you say can be used against you in court. Do you understand?" David nodded, not trusting his voice. "Tell us about the night of the accident," Officer Rodriguez began. "Start from when you left work." David went through the whole story again, exactly as he'd told it before. Walking home from Peterson's grocery, hearing the crash, finding Robert Sterling unconscious in his car, calling 911, pulling him to safety. The officers listened without expression, occasionally asking for clarification on timing or details. "You maintain that you had never seen or heard of Robert Sterling before that night?" Officer Thompson asked. "That's right, I had no idea who he was." "And you're saying this was all just a coincidence?" You just happened to be walking by at the exact moment a wealthy businessman crashed his car? David felt frustrated. Yes, that's exactly what happened. Why is that so hard to believe? The questioning went on for over an hour. The officers asked the same questions in different ways, trying to catch David in some kind of contradiction. But David's story never changed because it was the truth. Finally, Officer Rodriguez closed his notebook. That's all for now, Mr. Johnson. We'll be in touch if we need anything else. As they left the police station, David felt defeated. The officers clearly didn't believe him, and he had no idea how to prove his innocence. But while David was being questioned, Robert Sterling was busy making phone calls. As one of the city's most prominent businessmen, Robert had connections everywhere. And he was furious about what was happening to David. His first call was to the police chief, demanding to know why the young man who saved his life was being treated like a criminal. His second call was to his lawyer, one of the best attorneys in the state. His third call was to a private investigator. I want to know everything about this anonymous tip, Robert told the investigator over the phone. Who called it in when they called, what exactly they said, and I want to know by tomorrow. Robert's lawyer, meanwhile, was already working on getting security footage from every business near the accident scene. If someone was claiming David had staged the rescue, then the cameras would tell the real story. By Tuesday afternoon, the private investigator had traced the anonymous tip to a phone number. By Wednesday, they had a name: Kevin Walsh, a former employee of Sterling Industries who had been fired 6 months earlier for consistently showing up late and having a bad attitude toward customers. Robert remembered Kevin well. He'd been in the company's accounting department, and Robert had personally signed off on his termination after Kevin had been caught falsifying his timesheet. Kevin had been angry about losing his job, claiming it was unfair and threatening to get back at Robert somehow. The lawyer found Kevin's social media posts, which told an even clearer story. Kevin had been following news about Robert's accident and David's college fund online. In private messages to friends, Kevin had written things like, "Some kid gets rich just for pulling Sterling out of a car," and "I bet that whole thing was set up." But the real breakthrough came from the security footage. Robert's lawyer had managed to get video from 3 different businesses along Riverside Drive. The footage clearly showed David walking alone down the sidewalk, completely unaware of what was about to happen. It showed the exact moment of the accident, with David immediately dropping his backpack and running toward the wreck. There was no way the rescue could have been staged. Most importantly, the timestamps on the video matched perfectly with David's story about leaving work at 6 and reaching the accident scene around 6:30. On Thursday morning, Robert Sterling called a press conference. David didn't know it was happening until his mother saw it on the local news. "I'm here today to address some serious false accusations that have been made against a young hero," Robert said, standing behind a podium with microphones from several news stations. "David Johnson saved my life 3 months ago, and now someone is trying to destroy his reputation with lies." Robert held up printed screenshots of Kevin Walsh's social media posts. The anonymous tip that started this investigation came from a disgruntled former employee who was fired for dishonesty. This person has been posting online about his resentment toward me and toward David's success. He then showed the security footage on a large screen, pointing out how it proved David's innocence beyond any doubt. This young man risked his own safety to save a stranger's life, Robert continued, his voice getting emotional. And instead of being celebrated as a hero, he's been subjected to a police investigation based on lies from someone seeking revenge. Robert's lawyer stood up next. "We have filed a formal complaint against Kevin Walsh for filing a false police report. We also have evidence that Mr. Walsh has been spreading these false accusations on social media, which constitutes defamation." The press conference was all over the local news by that evening. David watched it with his mother, hardly believing what he was seeing. Robert Sterling, one of the most powerful men in the city, was using his influence to defend him. The next day, the police chief called David personally to apologize. "Mr. Johnson, I want you to know that all charges have been dropped. The investigation is closed, and we sincerely regret any inconvenience this has caused." But the real vindication came on Saturday, When David returned to work at Peterson's grocery, Mr. Peterson met him at the door with an embarrassed expression. "David, I owe you an apology. I should have trusted you from the beginning. Your job is waiting for you and I'm giving you a raise." As David walked through the store, customers he'd helped for months came up to him with words of support. Mrs. Chen from the pharmacy department hugged him and said, "I always knew you were a good boy. Don't let anyone tell you different." The hour. Following Monday, David's guidance counselor called him to the office with a huge smile. "David, I have some good news. Not only are all your college acceptances still valid, but 2 more schools have reached out after hearing your story. They want to offer you additional scholarships." 3 weeks later, David attended his high school graduation as valedictorian. Robert Sterling was there in the audience, beaming with pride as David gave his speech about perseverance and the importance of doing what's right even when it's difficult. In his speech, David talked about the night that changed his life. "I learned that doing the right thing isn't always easy," he said, looking out at his classmates and their families. "Sometimes people will question your motives or doubt your character. But if you stay true to yourself and surround yourself with people who believe in you, the truth will always come out." After the ceremony, Robert approached David and his mother with an envelope. "What's this?" David asked. "Your first semester tuition payment." Robert smiled. "MIT, here you come." David hugged the man who had become like a father to him. "Mr. Sterling, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. You already thanked me, David. You saved my life and you gave me a purpose again. Watching you succeed will be thanks enough." As David looked around at his mother's proud face, his classmates celebrating, and the man who had believed in him, when others doubted, he realized that sometimes the worst moments in life can lead to the best outcomes. The false accusations that had nearly destroyed his dreams had only made his support system stronger and his determination more fierce. Kevin Walsh eventually served community service for filing the false report, but David barely thought about him anymore. He was too busy looking forward to the future, a future that was brighter than he had ever imagined possible.